Joining is a term used to describe a number of different manufacturing processes that can combine two pieces together. Welding is a fabrication process that is used mostly on metals. It can use a variety of different fuel sources, such as gas, laser, or electric arcs. It is cost effective and can quickly create strong bonds for high-strength metals. Brazing is a similar process to welding, but involves using a filler metal which has a lower melting point to avoid melting the work pieces. Soldering is a very similar process to brazing, but is usually used in smaller applications and is cheaper but weaker. Sintering is a process that forms solid masses as one piece using heat and/or pressure. It occurs naturally in mineral deposits, but can be hard to replace effectively due to the work material. It is usually used on materials with high melting points, but is usually pricey. Adhesive bonding uses intermediate chemicals, such as epoxies, to connect two pieces. It can be strengthened or weakened with more or less application. A very cheap and widely available process that can be quickly applied and set. Fastening is the most common process, which uses a variety of pieces to join parts together through threading, pinning, and nailing. Easily available and very cheap at the expense of overall strength. Press fitting uses the design of the parts to its advantage to fit with each other and have an overall solid structural integrity. It is the most cost effective.
Finishing refers to the broad range of industrial processes that alter the surface of a manufactured item to achieve a certain property. These processes are typically employed to improve appearance, adhesion, wettability, solderability, corrosion resistance, tarnish resistance, chemical resistance, and other properties. These processes fall under two categories: removing or reshaping finishing, and adding and altering finishing. An example of adding would be painting. Painting is used to achieve a certain color property. An example of a removing finishing process would be sandblasting. Sandblasting is used to achieve a smoother surface property. Removing and reshaping corresponds with removing material, while adding corresponds with adding material. Almost all manufactured products have some sort of finishing process. The cost of a finishing process is entirely dependent on which specific process is being used. An example of this would be that sandblasting is much more expensive than buffing due to the equipment required for sandblasting. Time required is also extremely dependent on which finishing process is being used, similar to how the cost of finishing processes is dependent on the specific process. Multiple finishing processes are typically used on a single product.
Machining is the process where a piece of raw material is cut into a desired shape and size. This is done using a cutting tool to remove small chips of material. There are three main types of machining: turning, drilling, and milling. Turning is the process where the material is rotated against the cutting tool to generate a cylindrical shape. Drilling is when the rotating tool creates a round hole in the stationary material. Milling uses a rotating tool that moves around the raw material, cutting edges into the material. All three of these processes can be computerized using CNC machining. This is computer numerical control, where automation of machine tools by means of pre-programmed sequences is used. Almost any type of material can be used in these processes, ranging from wood, stainless steel, fiberglass, and plastics. Rough cuts are used to remove large portions of materials, and then finishing cuts are used to achieve final shape and desired tolerancy. The machines used for these processes are very expensive. The cost for production, though, is heavily influenced by the necessary tolerances, the process selected, the type of material, the desired shape, and the quantity. After these are decided, the process itself for production can be quite time-consuming. Using these processes, you're able to get a very tight and small tolerance.
Casting is a manufacturing process in which a liquid material is poured into a mold, which contains a hollow cavity of the desired shape and is then allowed to solidify. This solidified part is known as a casting. Casting materials are typically metal or other cold-setting materials that cure after mixing 2 or more components. Example of these nonmetals would be epoxy, concrete, plaster, or clay. Casting is useful for complex shapes that would otherwise be difficult or uneconomical to make. Types of casting are categorized into metalwork and resin casting. These categories are classified by the material used for the casting. Metalwork corresponds to metal castings, and resin castings correspond to nonmetals. The cost of casting is cheaper than similar techniques like 3D printing or machining. This is because for casting, you just need the material and molds as opposed to other expensive equipment that is needed for 3D printing or machining. It is also quicker than methods like 3D printing, but the time is totally dependent on what product you are actually making.
Forming is the process of using suitable stresses such as compression, tension, or shear to cause plastic deformation to produce the desired shape of the material. 3 different examples of forming are forging, rolling, and extrusion. Forging is the shaping of a material using localized compressive forces. These blows are delivered usually with a hammer or a die. Rolling is when metal stock is passed through 1 or more pairs of rollers to reduce the thickness and to make the material more uniform. Extrusion is when a material is pushed through a die of a desired cross-section. This can create materials with complex cross-sections and can be used with brittle materials. Shaping is a material process where the cutting tool reciprocates against a stationary workpiece, producing a plane or sculpted surface. This can produce flat surfaces as well as cross-sections with grooves and notches. With the exception of extrusion, all of these processes are applied only to metals. These processes are less expensive than similar methods on metals like casting and machining, but are also less precise. These processes are also time-consuming compared to